This is Mike at Fancy Foam Models. I'm going to do a video today on construction of a Fancy Foam Mega SST. I'm putting 5 mil new stuff for the covering, and I'm doing a double layer, so single layer everywhere, and I'm doing a double layer for about the first third. I'm not using a huge battery. In mine I've got a 700 milliamp LiPo. In this one I'm going to be putting a 2000 milliamp nickel metal hydride. And then I use full-size servos. These are HS322 HDs. To balance mine, I had to put a decent amount of lead in it, and it's just under our 35 ounce combat limit, so it's at 34.5 ounces. I just built a second one, built it all identical, and it came out the same, right? Just a hair under 35 ounces. I'm playing with one. I've got another one to build out of 1.3 pound foam instead of 1.9, and so I'm hoping it comes in more around the 25 to 28 ounce range, and then I'd have the ability to ballast it up. But for my pure combat, and that would be more for slope acro with some combat in it, but the 1.9 is I really like it for combat, and for slope acro it's really good. I'm actually thinking of putting ballast provisions in my 34.5 ounce Mega SST so that I can ballast it up maybe even to 45 ounces or 50 ounces and see what it does in some really heavy wind. But as it is now, it's very fast. In the same conditions, it's got an easy 10 mile an hour on the other planes that are out flying, and it really packs a punch being at 35 ounces. So anyways, into the build. This one's got printed graphics on it. I did kind of the blue and yellow checkered on top and yellow and blue stripes on the bottom. This one's partially constructed. The kit would just come with the 2 wing cores with the elevons cut and cut and beveled, not hinged. The kit will come with two 2mm spars, one for the top, one for the bottom. It will come with a 6-inch 1.5mm spar, and that actually, I haven't installed this one yet, that actually goes in the bottom, just maybe ½ inch in front of the trailing edge here, and that's to keep that from trying to split open due to combat or hard impacts to the ground. It'll come with about 2 feet of goldenrod. I like this for building we call it a predator style. My buddy Canuck kind of pushed this. He was taking the Windrider Bs and burying the control horns. So instead of having a metal push rod out the top with the servos coming out the top, the push rod goes into the foam about 3 or 4 inches from the hinge line, and then the servo is buried with the control arm facing down, and so it goes from the top to the bottom, and then the connection is just below the skin on the bottom, so there's nothing there to hit back here, and the only thing on the control horn or anything sticking out is a little bit here at the back. I've got nylon Dubro control horns. If they snap off, I've got spares, so I can just screw another one in and I'm good to go. And so it's durable, but yet if it does break, it's easily repaired. In addition to that, let's see, it'll come with the 256 clevises, 4 of them, 2 for the front, 2 for the back. It'll come with a 256 threaded rod for hooking the clevis up to the goldenrod. 2 little plywood mounts, as you saw in the other one, for mounting the control horns to the surface, and those will be machined so that there's a pocket for those to go into. I don't do any cutouts for the radio gear, and so I'm going to cover that tonight. The servos, 1 in each side of the wing. The battery's going to go up front, leaving at least 2 inches from the leading edge per our combat specs, and then we'll have a receiver pocket to go behind that. I'll include a piece of coroplast, and I'm not going to cut the hinge in it, but you actually cut through the webbing on one side only, and that allows that to hinge open. So I've got just a piece of tape holding it shut, and I pull the tape up, that pops open, that gives me access to the receiver. If I cut it out, and this one's cut out right here, the battery's sitting there. So I normally have covering holding this part down, and that'll hold the battery in. And then I've just got covering going over the control horns. If I ever need to get in there, I just cut the covering away, fix it, and then I can cover right back over it again. And so it'll come with this piece of coroplast, and I'll show tonight how I made the pockets for my battery, the receiver, the coroplast, and also the pockets for the servos. So getting started on this, I need to just kind of lay some stuff out. I actually hinge the elevons while I'm doing the covering, so I'm going to set those aside for now. Oh, and the kit will come with the 5mm new stuff for doing the covering. So like I said, you'll get the two separate wing halves. These were glued together with foam tack. Sell that on my website. This is my preferred glue for gluing EPP. The spars are the 2mm carbon rod. These are already glued in, but I'm going to talk about what I did to actually put those in place. So this spar is about 10 5/8 from the nose, so I've got about 5/8 of an inch to play with. So what I did is took a big heavy T-pin, I put that in the foam right there at the center, and then out here the spar comes a little bit more than halfway back. Again, like I said, it's not a huge deal. We want a bend in the spar. That helps set up the torsional rigidity in the wing, but then also helps with the bending. And so you want to do it about the same size. The spar comes about 6 inches short of the tip, so about maybe 6.5, 7 inches. I measured back 4.5, and then I put the T-pin in there. And my third one, again, come in about 6 inches, 6.5. Come in, put a T-pin in there. Then I took my spar, put it in front of the center T-pin and behind the two tip T-pins. That shows me the natural curve of that spar attached at those 3 points. So then I take my knife, drop it down so I have better control over it, and then I just cut a slot, maybe 1/4 inch deep, down into the foam, and I just went back maybe 1/8 of an inch behind the spar, and I just followed that curve of the spar about 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch behind it, something like that. You just want to stay fairly even. You don't want to go back and forth, because I mean it's rigid enough, it's going to try to straighten out, but just have a nice little cut all the way around. Go ahead and cut both sides, and then once that's cut, take your pins out, you take your foam tack and you stick the tip of that down into the slot and just squeeze and put glue all the way down the slot. Once that glue's in place, you just take the carbon rod, get it about centered, and just push the rod down into that slit. You run that all the way across. Then flip it over. Make sure you wipe any glue off of there. Flip it over, put the glue in the slot on the bottom, push the rod down in it. At this point, just the rod in the slot is enough to kind of hold any bend that's in the wing or hold it straight. What I'll do at that point is I'll put some pressure up here kind of straight out from where this carbon rod is, and I'll grab the tip and I'll just kind of pull it straight out. Grab this tip and I'll pull it just straight out in this direction, and then I'll do the same on this side. I'll put my hand in front of the spar on the left side and I'll pull that out. What that does is just kind of straighten the foam out and then those rods will kind of relax in place. From there, you can sight down that leading edge and see if it's straight. I'll check one side, I'll check the other. If I notice a little bend, then I can just flex that foam, and it takes 10 minutes or so for that glue to dry. Probably longer, being that it's buried in the foam, it doesn't have as much access to oxygen. And so I'll just kind of put a little pressure on the foam, and I can get that foam nice and straight, so that's looking down that leading edge is nice and straight. Then I'll sight down the trailing edge, and I'll check it too. And I'll do both sides, making sure that that's straight. Once that's done, I actually want to leave it propped vertically. So I'll lean it up against a wall or a shelf or something like that, so that there's no bending force in this way. If you lay it down and the edge is caught up on something, just gravity pulling down on that can cause a little bit of a warp. So I'll stand that up as straight as I can. I'll put some stuff next to it so that I don't have to worry about falling over it, and I'll let that dry just overnight so it's for sure stuck. Everything's good. So that's the two spars. I'm actually going to do the same thing for my little spar that's going to go right in front of the trailing edge. So this little guy's about 6 inches long. I'm going to take my straight edge, take my knife with just, a 1/2 inch sticking out, flip this around so I can see it better. I'll center this up. I'm going to go 3 inches on this side, 3 inches on this side, about a 1/2 inch in front of there. It doesn't really matter. And so from 7 inches, I'll get a slot about a 1/4 inch deep. And I'll run that over to 13. Now, you want the ends maybe a little deeper than you do in the center, because if I hold a straight edge across there, there's a gap here in the center. So I want that spar to sit kind of flat down in there. I don't, if it hits the bottoms of the ends, I don't want it sticking up in the middle. I want that glue to hold that really well. So that's there. This is here. What I did there is just took some scrap and just wiped any glue off the nozzle there, so I'm not spreading glue all over the top of the foam. I just want it to come out of the tip and into that slot. I'm going to pinch this foam, bend it a little bit so I can get that tip down in there. And then I'm just going to squeeze the bottle lightly as I pull that across. I can see a little bit of glue oozing out of the top there. Take my spar, shove it down into the foam. Make sure it's over far enough. If you get it, you don't want to go too far down into the foam, because you are somewhat weakening that foam right there. The glue will help get everything glued back together. As you can see, the spar sticks down further here than here. I can kind of see the spar in the center, but not out here because the foam is closed back up around it. I don't want a lot of glue on the surface, but I want all that glue smushed back down into that slot so it glues it back together well. And for that one, I can keep messing with the airplane because it's not really going to go anywhere. The spars have already got the planes nice and flat and everything. I know my battery's going to fit underneath my Coroplast thing. There's about a 1/4 inch all the way around there. If you end up with a bigger battery, you can always just, this just like reel it or sign material, or let me know when you place the order and I can give you a little bit bigger piece. But this works great for just a AA pack. So I'm going to lay this out. I want 2 inches away from the leading edge. So if I just do some quick measurements, leave myself a little bit of extra, that's going to be about 3 1/4 inches from the nose. And so I'm going to take my pin and just draw a faint line all the way around this. And then for my servos, so on the elevon, it's going to have a pocket routed. I actually haven't routed this one yet. I'll do that tonight, but normally it'll have that pocket routed into that. In my case, I can just grab the one that's already built and tell you that that puts the control horn at 4 3/4 inches from the center of the plane. And so I know I need my servo arm at 4 3/4 from the center of the plane. So again, and I put the servo arm towards the back. So 4 3/4. And again, I want at least 2 inches from the leading edge. So that's about 2 1/4. And then I'm going to draw my faint line around that. I'll talk real quick about servo arms. This thing will be combated, so I want the biggest arm I can get. This one's not bad. It's the 4-place. Some servos will come, and I'm surprised the HD didn't come with a heavier duty arm. But the other thing is we're going to be grinding this down. That has 3 holes out. I'm probably not going to use the outside one. It's probably going to be too close to the surface and stick out. I really want the second one from the inside. So there's the first from the inside and the second one. That's going to be the one I'm really going to end up using. It's also got this one here. And then I've also taken these wheels and then just cut 3 sides off of it. And so I just had one big fat arm. So there's a couple different things you can do. This 2-sided arm is actually pretty heavy duty. And actually the innermost hole is where the second hole is on this one. So I'll probably cut off one of the arms on this dual and then cut off anything outside of that inner hole. And that inner hole is what I'm going to use. That'll put the clevis just kind of even or slightly above the surface of the servo, but the servo is going to be below the surface of the foam, so everything should be sunk down in there again. So I'll worry about that a little bit later. Oh, the other thing for the control horns, these are screwed into the plywood pieces. Now, the screws on these heavy duty servos, they've got a little flat section here. We can't use those to screw those in. I sell a lot of 9-gram servos. That's what I use in all my 3D planes. And those servos work great. If you don't have any 9-gram servos laying around and have the extra arms for those, again, you can let me know when you place your order and I can throw some in there for you. It's just a really small, like a 256 size wood screw. And so I've got 4 of those. I've got a bag full of servo horns for 9-gram servos I used over the years. There's probably another 30 servo or screws in there. So I just keep those around for cases like this where I'm going to screw a control horn in. So I've got my 2 servo openings, and then I've got my coroplast. So for the servo openings, I'm going to use my knife. I'm going to cut completely through the foam from one side to the other. Talking of knives, when you cut an EPP, it dulls foam very quickly, and it'll tear if your knife isn't very sharp. These knives that are like a buck and a half at Ace Hardware, I use these exclusively for cutting and trimming EPP. They work great. They're very narrow, so they're easy to get around corners and that kind of stuff, and they're very sharp. It's a razor blade basically. You can snap them off when the tip gets dull. By the time the tip gets dull from cutting EPP, the whole blade is dull. I usually just throw it out and grab another one. So I'm going to carefully cut straight down. Usually I won't get my knife perfectly angled, and so it'll usually, this plug will push out easier up or down or whatever. I kind of push it a little bit both ways to see which one's easier. In this case it was easier to push down. And so now I've got an opening for my servo to go into. I'll go ahead and cut little slots for these tabs to go into. For this bottom, what I want to do is, and this foam isn't tapered too much, so I'm not going to worry too much about having to have everything angled or whatever. But what I want to do is cut and get the servo just about centered inside the foam, maybe a little bit lower to the bottom. So it looks like I'm going to do about 1/4 inch. And find my pencil. So I'm going to mark over about 1/4 inch all the way around on this foam. Let's make sure I mark the correct side. Yep. So that's about 1/4 inch. That's going to put the servo about the center, but the important part is I want to have this servo arm below the surface, and I've got plenty of room for that. So now I'm going to cut I'm just going to cut part way there, flip it over, cut part way there. This helps me get a nice even cut. If I try to go all through it in one sweep, I usually get off a little bit. All right, so now I've got the part that fits below the servo. And so I'll actually glue this back in place. And once it's glued in place, you can see it pretty much disappears. So I'll glue that, and then I'll get started cutting on my other one. Okay, I've got that nice and flush with the surface. I'm going to let that dry. And then once it's dried a little bit and staying put, I'm going to come back and put some more glue on that inside edge so that piece is in there nice and firm. And when I mount the servo, it's not going to go anywhere. I am going to go back and look at where I glued these servo covers in. This is the top of the plane, so I want it to look good. Those are nice and flat. I'm going to take my glue now and just put a little extra glue on these edges down in here, just so I don't have to worry about them getting pushed out. It just kind of adds a little bit more strength down in there. I'm getting low on glue here, so, but I got enough to finish this out. All right, before I get too far along on everything else, I want to get a couple things done on the elevons so that they're ready when I start my covering. So we've got the 2 plywood mounts for the control arms that go in these pockets. I've already glued the carbon spars, and I did forget to mention these when I first talked about the parts that come in the kit, but these are 4mm OD by 3mm ID carbon rods. I believe these are about 500 millimeters long, and so the spar slot here will come pre-routed, so all you have to do is put a bead of glue in the bottom, put the carbon spar in there and lay it down on a flat surface, let that cure. I do still need to mount these plywood pieces. These holes are set so that the arm has the correct angle, and so you want to really make sure that you get the right arm so that the arm, or the right pad in the right place so that the arm angles correctly. So if I set the wing up here, I put these up near the trailing edge. I'm going to cut these loose. The little bottom plates I don't use. They're made for sandwiching a surface. Our surface is a little thick for that, and so that's why the plywood plate is there, and we just screw directly into that. So I've got to make sure I have the correct plywood plate, or at least they're the same, but one that you have to have them flipped the right way. So if this is flipped correctly, then that arm should be pointed straight up the wing. If I have the wrong arm on there, now that arm is pointed out towards the wingtip. Or if I have the plate flipped upside down, this arm is now pointed to the right. This arm is now pointed to the left. So the plate has to be put on in the correct way, and then you have to grab the correct arm. So that plate with this arm, that points it straight up the wing. This plate facing that way with this arm points that one straight up the wing. So those are how I want the arms, and I know I've got the control horns that'll fit those. I'm going to set those off. I'm now going to take this and I'm going to make sure I don't flip that over. I want to leave that just how it is. I'm going to take my bottle of glue. I'm going to put a nice little coating of glue down inside there. And then, without flipping it, drop that into place. Drop that into place, press it down securely. Now I'm going to measure twice, so I glue once. I'm going to put that control horn back over the holes, line it up. Put this control horn back over these holes, line it up. Put these by the trailing edge. Both of them are still pointed forward, so I know I'm good. So I'm now going to take these, set them aside, and let those cure out. Right now, I want to route this pocket here so that this coroplast will sit down inside there. I also want to have a pocket for this battery to sit in here. And I'm going to have this battery sit about like this. And so I'm going to draw around it. And then I also want a place for my receiver to sit. So my receiver is going to sit down in here. I'm just going to leave about 1/4 inch around the outside, so I have plenty of room for the receiver and the wires and so forth. And then I'm going to route out the pocket for the battery. If you don't have a router, you can take your knife, figure out how deep it needs to cut. You know, you can set kind of the depth there, and then you can cut all the way around there. Maybe cut strips out, and then just use a pair of like needle nose pliers, something like that, and just dig the pieces out. Then do some test fitting. The foam is flexible, so if it's not a smooth bottom, it's not the end of the world. But that would be another way to do it. Now I've stopped just short of the edges because I want to be able to see what I'm doing when I get close to these edges. do a little test fit of my battery. Make sure it sits down in there. Yep, nice snug fit. Alright, so that's good there. Now, this depth will work pretty good for my receiver. So I'm just going to use that same setting and cut out the pocket for my receiver. Okay, so I've got my battery slot, my receiver slot. Now I need to cut the rest of this out for this thickness. Alright, so changing bits. Gonna make that the depth of the coroplast. Want that to sit nice and flush. Alright, so that now fits nice and flush with the surface of the phone. I'm going to cut a little slot here in one end. That's going to be for the battery wire. So the battery drops down in there. The wire goes through the little slot into the receiver bay. And now the battery's mounted. Got the servo. I've snapped off the one side of the arm. I'm going to grind down the other. Now the one thing you want to do is make sure that this is centered. You can get in there to loosen the screw if you need to move it on there, but it's really kind of a pain in the butt. So this one I actually need to move. They've got it centered this way. I need to have it centered that way. So we'll do that real quick. That's going to sit there, and again I want the arm to come up. Okay, so that's going to sit like that. Now I need to route a space over for the very long servo lead length. So I'm just going to come off of here. I do need to go down a ways because that's going to sit down in there a ways. I'm going to bring that over down into this battery area here. The slot, near the slot where that battery wire is going to come out. That's going to fit there. I'm going to take some of my glue. I'm going to put it in the opening for the servo, just on the sides. That way when it cures, that servo's nice and rigid in place. Shove that wire down into the slot. Okay, that come out of there. And I'll get the other one ready. Okay, got my battery in. I don't worry about gluing that because the cover will hold it. Got my two servos in, they're glued. Got my coroplast hatch cover. Now, I do need a hinge in it. So I'm going to put a mark just behind the battery. And then I'm going to take my knife. And I'm not going to cut all the way through. I'm just going to cut through the webbing on one side. That's going to make a hinge. So the front part will be held in by covering. I don't need to glue that. The back part, I'll have a piece of tape holding it down, and then I can get in to plug and unplug the battery to turn the radio on and off. So that's all good to go. The push rods won't get set up until after all the covering's done. Got one last thing to do before I can cover it. Need to cover up these servos here. So this is a block for here. I don't need this extra piece on here where the servo arm is. I'm not worried about covering that little bit up, so I'm going to cut that off. So that'll go there. Same on this side. Okay, so I've done a good job of setting these in there. They're about the same size, but I need to cut this top section off, and I don't have a way to really measure that, except if I took this block and I turned it upside down, now it's the right height. So I do that. I can either just take my pen and make a mark on there. Yeah, I'll do that. I could take my knife and just run that across. I think I'd rather do the mark. Now, I got a nice cover to fit that. Now, if I look at this, one side is a little bit thicker, and of course that's going to be the side closer to the center. That fits nicely. I don't even have to worry about gluing these in, because when I put the covering over it, it's just going to hold it down flat, hold it in place. It's not really doing much to hold the servo because I've got it glued to the foam in there. So I've got those two covers in place. Now I'm ready to cover. So it's time to start covering. This is 5mm new stuff. It's a laminated mylar. It comes with a heat activated glue on it, and it's clear, so I can get all my paint or graphics, whatever, on the plane and then cover over it, and you'll see right through it. The kit will come with 12 feet of the laminating mylar. These pieces, I've cut 4 pieces, they're about 34 inches, and so that 12 feet will cover all that you need on this plane. The only downside I have, which is just kind of a minor thing, is for this covering to fit, let me get 3 of these pieces out of here, so we're just working with one. These are 18 inches wide. And if I leave a little over the trailing edge, it's short about 1 inch at the leading edge. We've got plenty of extra that I'm going to cut away from up here, so what I do is I cover everything except for this little part of the leading edge, and then I take some of that extra and cover that. And then you can even I like to double up at least this area right in here, just because that's where all the ground and a lot of the impacts happen, so that you can make that a little more durable. It's up to you if you want to extend how much that you cover on this. As I was talking earlier, I cover about the front third doubled up with this, but that does make the plane quite heavy. And so you don't have to do that. You could even do like the front inch, or maybe just the center half of the leading edge, or just put 1 layer on all of it. It's kind of up to you, but the plane comes with enough to do 1 coating, 1 layer on everything. There'll be some extra if you want to do a little bit more, that's fine. It is clear, so if you have overlapping pieces, it's really hard to tell. The one thing you do need to watch out for, and I can show it a little later, is when you have 2 pieces covering over each other. If you're not careful how you cover it, you can get some bubbles trapped in there. It's not too hard to deal with. Take your T-pin, poke where the bubble is, and then iron the air out. And then also the hinge for the elevon is going to be done with the covering. And so on this plane, I'm going to start with the top. I'm going to overlap the trailing edge of the elevon by maybe 3/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch. I don't need a whole lot there, but what I want to do is wrap the top layer around to the bottom, under the bottom of the elevon, and then the bottom layer will just come back, overlap that, and trim it flush with that trailing edge. I like to have all my Mylar around the whole airplane overlapping because it does stick really well to itself, and it just kind of keeps everything together a little better. So I'll pull my Mylar back. I'm going to get my trailing edge put in place. Just to help things out a little bit, I'll take a couple small pieces of tape, and I'm going to tape that trailing edge in place. And then I will line this up. I'll make sure I go out past the tip of the elevon. I'm going to have about 1/4 inch to 3/8 overlap all along the trailing edge of the elevon. And then I just want to make sure I go past the center line at the leading edge a little bit. So that gets my piece. I'm going to tack this down, work my way. I want to work from the center out. And so I'm going to tack it down in the center, and then I'm going to start working from the center out in all the different directions. I don't need this much overlap, and I especially don't want a lot of extra material in the back of the plane. So I'm going to overlap about an inch, 1.5 inches. I'll trim that off once I get everything tacked down so I know it's not going to move. Covering iron wise, this is a Top Flight monocoat iron. I've had this thing, I don't know, a couple of decades. I've got it turned up almost all the way. It's almost at the 3 spot, and it is really hot. You don't want to hold it in one place too long. You can eventually melt the foam if you get it too hot, but you really want it hot enough that you're going to tack this down. Another thing is I don't put any spray glue. We used to, when we used monocoat and ultracoat and Solartex, we would put some 3M77 down to help it stick. This stuff sticks really well. If it does come up, you can hit it with the iron and seal it back down again. And so I don't bother with anything on the foam. So I'm just going to start right in the middle. This foam does, or the covering does shrink a little bit, but not too much. I've got that tacked real good. This isn't going to move around. I'm going to take the tape and the elevon off for now. And I'm going to keep working this out. Again, I'm going to start at the center. I'm trying to use quite a bit of pressure. I'm not really pulling on the covering, I'm just keeping it flat. Now, one thing you don't want to do is push down so much that you're really flexing the material. So sometimes I'll actually put my hand on the opposite side of where the iron is, move the iron on my hand at the same time, just to help keep everything flat. The other thing I can do is hang part of the plane off the table so that the bottom's sitting flat. Now on this elevon, what I don't want is any rubbing between the two, so I'm going to trim a little bit off this edge. I'm going to trim more at the trailing edge than the front. Probably 1/8 of an inch at the trailing edge and 1/16 at the front, or just flush at the front. I'll do the same on this one. That lined up where I want it. Again, I'm going to start in the center. I'm going to get this tight, but I'm going to pull that down to where I want it. Lock that in place. Do the same here. Get it tight. Pull it down. You want to make sure that that's going to come down all the way without much pressure. That way you're not binding up your elevon there. So I'll finish covering this. And to cover this tip, I'm going to cut several slices. Where it curves more, I'll cut them closer together. Out here, I'll cut them further apart. And then from the trailing edge forward, I'll pull a slice up, tack it down, pull the next one up, and glue it down. And I'll continue with the other side. top's done. Now, the bottom takes a little more work because I want it flush about with the trailing edge, but I also want to seal in this gap here. So that's going to leave me maybe 1/2 to 5/8 of an inch along that trailing edge. I'm going to go ahead and roughly trim this. Yeah, maybe even 3/4 of an inch down there. I've got enough of an overlap. If it comes up a little short, that's fine. I just want the two pieces to overlap some. You notice I'm not doing anything over that hatch yet. I'll get to that in a bit. So I can see right where my hinge line is in my hatch. and I'm wanting to push down so that gap's nice and tight when I seal that. Kind of pulling the covering back and pushing down on the elevon at the same time. And then if I have any covering hanging off, I've got a little bit there, I'll just trim it, even with that trailing edge. So I've put the covering over the top of the front part of the hatch, over the battery, but then I put the covering under the back part of the hatch, and what I'm going to do is run this covering down into the hatch area. So I'm going to make a few cuts there, and then cuts to the corners. And then I'll tuck this covering down into the recessed area. Just like that. So the last side of the wing that needs covered. Again, I'm going to overlap about 3/4 of an inch at the trailing edge to make sure that I've got enough to wrap around once I've gone down into this hinge area. All right, covering is done. Now I need to put on the control horns. I've got my servo screws. These are from 9-gram servos. They work really well. All right, so next is the push rods. I'm going to cut away the covering over the servos. Okay. Now I know the push rods need to go straight forward. So what I'm going to do is get my straight edge forward. I'm going to go about 3 inches forward of the control horn and just cut a slit in the covering and the foam. All right, so I've got the goldenrod that I'm going to use for the push rod, and I've got a piece of brass tubing. This one's just a little bit bigger, the same size is ideal. I'm going to take this. I've taken a knife, this helps a little bit, and I'll just scrape that inside there and kind of sharpen that edge. And then I'm going to chuck this in my little drill and find my slit, and I'm going to push that down into the foam even with the push rod, and I want to go down at an angle so this just goes under the spar. And so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I'm going to hold that leading edge down so it doesn't move. And I went, about that deep, so I'm maybe a little over halfway to the servo. You don't want to go too much an angle, you don't want to come out the bottom, but I'm just going to try to make it halfway, and then I'm going to go from the servo back the other way, and the two holes will line up together. So I got that first part in. I've cleared the foam out of the tubing, and it's not really pushing on the brass tubing. As this starts heating up against the foam, it's just going to kind of melt its way through the foam. So you don't have to do a lot of pressure. You just want to kind of get it spinning against the foam. That'll generate some heat, and then it'll just kind of slide its way right in. It goes in pretty easy. So I'm lined up with the servo. I've got the arm out of the way. And then I'm just going to go straight back at an angle going down. It didn't feel like it broke through. I'm going to put this through and see if it'll go. Nope, I didn't get in far enough. See if I've got those two connected yet. I think I'm close. So the one from the servo looks like it's to the left of this one coming in. So I need to kind of get it over outboard a little bit. And there we go, it's all the way through. The smaller rod's a little easier to put through, so what I'll do is I'll put that in, and then I'll put the bigger one in over the top of it, and then I can pull the small one out. So now what I want to do is I want this blue rod to be about an inch back from where the servo is. So I'm going to pull it to where it's flush. I can just see the end of the rod there, and then I'm going to pull it back about an inch. And then let me grab a clevis. So the clevis is going to go onto that connector. It's going to come up, and so I want maybe 2 inches of this coming out, or maybe an inch forward of the hinge line there. So I'm just going to eyeball that, come up about an inch, make a mark. And then I'll just score this all the way around. and then I can just snap it. So that's in place. I usually will glue this a little bit. I'll do that here. I'll get the other one set up and then I can glue them both in. What I do is just kind of pull that aside, put a little glue in there, and that keeps that from moving. So again, I've got my slot up here. I can see they're connected, but they're just, that rod's not wanting to make it through. Get that rod about there. Pull back about an inch. Make my mark forward about an inch. Glue these in place. All right, now I can start getting my clevises set up. So for the clevis that goes in here, I put that tight against the inner rod there. And then I'll use a pair of needle nose to attach it to the servo. And then get my servo centered. Okay. All right. So elevons are attached. Ready for the receiver. I'll do a little more covering over the servos. I'll put some covering over the nose. The last thing to do is the tips. I'll do that real quick. All right, for the tips, I'm going to use two things to attach it. I've got the 3M bidirectional strapping tape, and then I've got some Velcro. This is the way I like to do my tips. There's lots of different ways to do them. Some people glue them on, some people Velcro them on, some people cut slots and use strapping tape to kind of strap it on. Lots of different things, but this is how I do mine. I want to put some Velcro back here towards the trailing edge. So I'll take my pin, get that Velcro kind of flush with the bottom down there. Well, I guess that's the top. Draw a little line, and I'm going to cut this Velcro so it's the same size as that wingtip. And I like the rough stuff on the wing, so I'll figure out which one that is. And then I'll attach that. Peel that off. Now I'm going to line up the front of the tip with the nose. And then line up the back so that it's got the same, basically the same, just as much up or down. I'll move that just a little bit easier to see if I hold it this way. Okay, so if I get the tip, get that even, and then what I do is I take about 2.5 inches of tape. I'm going to cut it in half. And then I'm going to cut those pieces in half. That gives me 4 pieces about 3/8 of an inch wide. I'm going to tape that to the leading edge of the wing and then double it up. Then I'm going to take this piece, cut that in half, and then wrap that around the leading edge. So with these, I don't have to worry about losing my tips because they come completely off. If they get hit hard enough, if the Velcro comes off, they're still attached. A lot of times they'll flip back and Velcro again. Sometimes, occasionally, they'll flip to the bottom, flip to the top. But I don't have to hunt all over the slope for my tip. I'll do the same for the other side. And the tips will be on. Alright, so I'm pretty much done with the video at this point. Airplane's all done. All the controls are hooked up, servos, everything. I'm still going to cover this and add some covering to the nose. I'll probably, on this one, I'm probably going to add a little more covering to the leading edge just to beef it up a little bit. And then I've got to balance it. So the balance on this is 10 inches back from the nose. Get my Sharpie. So I've got a CG mark. A couple ways to do ballast. I buy these, this is a 21/32, a little over a 1/2 inch diameter brass tubing. I'll fill this with lead. I know the servo wire's here. I've got a good space right in here to put the nose weight. What I've done, there's a couple different ways. I've taken the brass tubing and I've drilled from the leading edge back and then cut through with my knife, pulled out that plug, slid the ballast in, and then put the foam back in. I've cut a chunk completely out of the airplane, just cut straight through like we did with the servos. Pull that piece out, then drill through it with the brass tubing, put your nose weight in. I've even cut, the last one I did, I cut this battery area back out, pulled the battery out, and then drilled in to the side and put slugs in just kind of up to the front of the servos. So there's a couple different ways, just depends on how much you need. This one's not balancing too bad. It's balancing around maybe 11 inches. So I just need to move the CG forward about 1 inch. So this is the Mega SST, and that was the build for it. Thanks for watching.